Greetings, Japan fans, and welcome to today's show where we're talking to an old friend of mine, Masa Namiki, who's the CEO of Interbrand, about leading in Japan. He's a born and bred Japanese executive raised here, running the local branch of a big international organization and talking about his views on leadership. This is going to be very, very, very insightful. Maishu, arigatou gozaimasu, and welcome back to the Leadership Japan series. I'm your host in Tokyo, Dr. Greg Story, your corporate coaching and training guy, the president of Dale Carnegie Training Japan, the best-selling author, Japan Sales Mastery, and we have a new book on how to master business Japan called Japan Business Mastery. It was a master stroke of naming, wasn't it? Anyway, this book has also gone #1 bestseller on Amazon. And we are broadcasting around the world from Minato-ku in the center of Tokyo, the leadership capital of Japan. This podcast brings insights, examples, and experience about leading in Japan. Trust me, it is different here. We are looking for feedback on the show and an indication of any preferences you have about potential future topics. Let us know. Leave us your comments. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, and share this podcast. We do 5 podcasts a week, every day, Monday to Friday. On iTunes, Mondays, you have the Cutting Edge Japan Business Show podcast. Tuesdays, the Presentation Japan series. Wednesdays, the Sales Japan series. This one, Thursdays, the Leadership Japan series. And Fridays, the Japan Business Mastery Show podcast. Before we get going, today's handy Japanese phrase is koso koso shinaide, which means don't keep a secret, tell me what you're talking about. Why all the secrecy, that type of thing. Two people may be in very deep conversation, very conspiratorial way they're talking to each other, and you might just say, koso koso shinaide. Hey, what's all the secrecy about? Don't keep this a secret. Koso koso shinaide. Koso koso shinaide. Koso koso shinaide. Koso koso shinaide. What's all the secrecy? You got a big secret going on here? What's going on here? Koso koso shinaide. Koso koso shinaide. Koso koso shinaide. Don't keep it a big secret. Tell me what's going on. Koso koso shinaide. Koso koso shinaide. This is episode number 341. And today we have an interview with the CEO of Interbrand here in Japan, Mr. Masa Namiki. And we are going to get his views on leading in Japan. Welcome to this episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. My special guest today is the CEO of Interbrand here in Japan, Masa Namiki-san, who's an old friend of mine and has got great experience about leading in Japan. And we're going to talk about leadership today. But Masa-san, just at the beginning, some people may not know much about your background. Tell us a little bit about how you got to become the president of Interbrand in Japan, some of your background, and a little bit about what Interbrand itself does.
Well, thank you for the introduction. I'll start with the most interesting part of my background and go into the professional side. Mm-hmm. Besides being always management consultant, I once won Argentinian tango dance APAC champion.
Wow. Now, I've known you a long time. That has never come out before. That is phenomenal. Congratulations. That's awesome.
So that kind of add color to my career. So besides that, I have always been management consultant. So I started my career at PwC Consulting, and then I worked there for several years, and then I went to MBA. Then when I came back, I worked for McKinsey & Company.
So when you say you did your MBA, you came back, where did you go and do the MBA?
So I was born and raised in Japan, and I studied in Japan all the way up to end of high school. And then I went to the States, and I studied at Boston University. So when I was thinking about MBA, I didn't want to go back to the States because I think MBA is not just about education, but it's about experience. So I already had experience of living in the States. So I wanted to live in different place. So the next destination is usually Europe. But as I said, I was dancing tango. So I wanted to go to South America. But doing MBA in Buenos Aires doesn't sound right. So I was looking through all the program in Europe, and then I came across with this program where HEC Paris in France provides a double degree program where I could do half of my MBA in Paris and the other half in Buenos Aires. So I spent 1 year in Buenos Aires.
Perfect.
The other year in Paris.
Oh, that's an awesome result. Very well organized.
Yes.
Extremely well organized.
And I was lucky, I guess. So that led me, actually when I get into MBA, I was thinking, after 7 years of doing consulting, I wasn't sure if consulting wasn't the thing for me. But also I knew I wanted to do business because right before MBA, I actually was making money teaching dancing tango. So it was kind of significant point in my career to really think what I want to do with my career or with my life. And I decided, well, tango would be a good thing for me to do as a hobby, but not something that I want to make money out of for the rest of my life. And I wasn't sure about consulting either, but when I was going through MBA for 2 years, it re-gave me energy or interest again to get back into consulting. So I was lucky enough to get offer from McKinsey & Company. So I went back to McKinsey, worked for 2 years, and then went to another firm called Salmon, which is now a part of Accenture. And then 5 years ago, I moved to Interbrand. And then 1 year after I joined Interbrand, I became a CEO. And since then, so I'm finishing my 4th year as CEO.
So for you, very amazing background, terrific background, the most interesting background I've ever heard. That's great. In terms of leadership in Japan, so you've been inside big companies, you've been a consultant, where you're dealing with clients, but you're not necessarily leading a big team like you are now. So what were some things you found that were challenging in Japan as a leader? Right.
So Interbrand Japan, right now we have about 100 people in our company. About 30 plus of them are strategists. So they come from consulting background or brand management or marketing background in the industry. 40 plus people are creatives. So they're graphic designer, copywriters, motion designers, interior designers, very different people. And on top, we have about 15 people in sales and marketing team. They also come from very different background. Many of them come from experience in agencies, media agencies. So the team is very diverse as a professional firm. I think professional firm tends to be a lot more homogeneous, but our office is very diverse. So to me, to lead a team, it's quite complicated. On top, that's my first time to lead a big team like that. And honestly speaking, I struggled a lot, probably for the first couple of years. I'm still struggling. When you say you were struggling at first, what were those things that were causing you to struggle? Yeah, so I think, very frankly speaking, I think from capability-wise, or from mindset-wise, I was ready for the position, but from actually doing the job perspective, I wasn't ready enough. So once when I went into the position, I was figuring out what to do, what I can do to make the company go forward better. And my struggle, the biggest struggle is I didn't have somebody to go to when I was in trouble or when I wasn't sure.
Is that because you're a global organization, and I'm sure there are people inside the company, but they probably don't know Japan? Is it the issue of, yes, they might know about leading in their country, but this is Japan, so it's a bit different. So there's no reference point for you there.
Yes, exactly. So at that time, we had regional structure. So we had APAC CEO and then global CEO. I could, and I did, talk to my bosses, but the discussion didn't happen in a way that was helpful for me because, like you said, they base their advice, they give advice based on their experience in the other countries. Size is different, culture is different, people are very different. So, very soon I came to realize that didn't really help. So, and I wasn't resourceful enough to have outside network for me to seek help. So that was a big struggle in the first couple of years.
And were these mainly people issues because you've got one group of creatives who probably need quite a different type of leadership to a group of highly analytical consultant-focused people, and you've probably got back office people, sales people, quite diverse perspectives and needs. So how did you find trying to balance the needs of all those different groups?
So I don't think I have perfect answer yet, but after 4 years of struggle, I came to conclusion that I can't rely on my skill set to lead them. I need to rely on my personal skill or people skill, I guess. So functional skill, it's difficult to lead diverse people with functional skill. But people skill, it's not about people skill. I think it's more about how I am, how I act, how I present myself. That has very strong powers for me to connect with anybody, even when they have very different skill set, need, personality, anything.
So in that sense, are you altering your way of dealing with people depending on the type of person? Like, for example, if they're very fast-paced, very dynamic, you have a certain style with that person. If they're very quiet, a little bit shy, different style with that person. If they're very creative, you might have a different approach. Are you breaking your approaches up according to the types of people, or do you have a sort of constant style of your own that you sort of apply everywhere?
I think it's both are the true. So when it comes to having direct communication, I try to adapt more to the person to whom I'm talking to. But as a leader, and as how to be as a leader, I would keep what I am. So I think what I'm trying to say is, I think what I came to realize these days is, for me, it's very important that I am very authentic who I am. I am very true to who I am. And I don't really try to act as if I were a different person. I think that would gain that has gained confidence. Confidence, yeah. That has gained confidence of as a person, as a leader. So they feel easier to be connected with me. So that kind of helps me to adapt in terms of communication style when I'm talking directly to the person. But I think the key to me is not try to be the big CEO person, but be who I am and lead with that, but not to be afraid to show that.
So does that mean that you're using a more consensual style of leadership where it's more a consensus, trying to build a consensus of ideas around a decision rather than having a very strong lead on we should do this? How are you applying that authentic you in that way of directing, or not particularly, maybe not directing, having them direct the direction?
So when I went into the position, I had this image that CEO have to make decision, make changes, drive company. What I came to realize after a few years is it didn't stick. The changes that I have made didn't stick.
So just to keep on that point, did you have that concept as a Japanese person, born, raised, educated in Japan, worked in Japan for foreign companies where you had leaders? Was your concept of what the leader had to be based on what you'd seen and you thought, well, that's how I should be? Was that why you were doing it that way?
Yes. Yes, I guess, yes, I learned it from the leaders that I have seen. So I don't know if it is very Japanese thing or not, but at least with the leaders that I have worked with, they tend to have that type of style. So I adapted to that.
And that's because they were foreigners or they were Japanese who'd sort of got used to that gaishike, that foreign multinational style of leadership?
I think it's a latter.
The latter.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're trying this more dynamic, I'm the leader approach, and it's not getting anywhere. And how did you discover that actually it's not getting anywhere? What were the things you noticed? Like, hang on a minute, this isn't working.
So I think it's when I was doing it, change happened. But, once I shifted my attention or focus to something else, it kind of went back to where it was. So it was kind of easy to see what I was changing happened only temporarily when I was really driving it. But once the pressure is gone, things goes back. So that's when I realized that it's more important for me to make things happen from the grassroots. So that meant, I needed to shift more consensual base, but I think it's more than make it consensus, but it's more find a way to infuse the desire to change into our members so that they would initiate that change process rather than creating consensus.
So what you're talking about there is getting some sense of ownership on their part to want to drive the process and drive the direction. So how do you get Japanese team members to grab that sense of ownership? Because a lot of people complain that Japanese staff can be very loyal but very passive. Mm-hmm. Tell me what to do and I'll do it, as opposed to I'll take responsibility and accountability and work out what we should do. How did you get that switch?
So a few things that worked for me. One easier one is to find the right member, give them more authority, empower them more, even give them more higher title so that they would start to feel that they can own it and drive it. The other thing is show the benefit of the direction that I want to go and make it their benefit, that they feel by driving that, they personally will benefit in their work. For me, those two things have worked.
So having that group of people who are taking that responsibility, accountability. Now, the other problem in Japan is mistakes or errors or defects are not looked upon very positively, and so Japanese people have learnt to avoid making errors, avoid making mistakes, and the way of doing that is to do nothing. Take no responsibility, always say no. It's the easiest thing is to say no. So, how did you deal with that when you gave people accountability and they made a mistake or it didn't go well or there were errors or there were problems? How did you deal with that situation?
So, as I said, our company only has 100 people. So it's still a size where I personally can back up certain initiative where high risk is involved, high risk of failure is involved. So, for example, right now we are trying to launch a new service in Japan, which is not failure, which is a big challenge. So for that, I personally try to stay always behind or back of the risk taker, so that he or she feels easier to take risk. While if it were smaller ones, basically what I have been trying to do is not to really not to really blame a person for the failure, and that people see it that way, so that they feel a lot more encouraged to take risk. So I think what's been important is that I make it public in a way that I acknowledge taking the risk at the first. If it didn't work, I acknowledge that risk taking in the first place, so that people start to feel that. Me telling them this is risk-free environment, you should try, didn't really change anything. But there are few of them who start taking risk, and not making sure that is seen in the right light has been help.
I guess one of the big things I notice about Japan is the importance of gaining trust.
Yes.
And so for a lot of foreign leaders who are sent into Japan on short-term assignments, they have the language barrier, the cultural barrier, but also they have that building trust barrier. And so how do you get people to trust you? You talked before about being authentic. How do you actually get them to trust you, to get that sense of, I'll volunteer for the project, I'll be accountable for it, I'll possibly fail, but I'm confident to take it on because I trust my leader who's given me that accountability? How do you build that trust?
It's a big question. I don't think I have answer to that. What I'm trying to do is, one is to establish more personal relationship with key leaders, so that they feel they have more personal level connection. And it doesn't need to be something big or something deep. It's having one-on-one meeting every once in a while, or showing my vulnerability to them. I think that allowed them to feel that I'm as much of a person as who they are.
Just on that point of vulnerability, that's a very interesting comment. Is that something that would be typical, you would think, in a Japanese situation of leadership where the leader would show vulnerability, or not? Are you doing something that's a bit unusual, or is that usual?
I think it's unusual, but younger the leaders are, I think it's a little different. The older, say, people in the 50s or 60s, I think that's not how they have been brought up to be a leader. But I think in the younger generation, people are more acceptable about the idea of showing vulnerability or who you are. And I think that there is a difference between generation to the other.
Today's show is brought to you by our public courses, but we also do custom in-house programs, and we do them in both Japanese and English. Now, today's program is brought to you by our Step Up the Leadership program, next one on the 27th of January, not that far away, and also our Leadership Training for Managers program. That's a 7-week program that starts on May the 19th. Now, Step Up the Leadership is a great program. It's one of those bridging programs for someone who's been a player and now they've become a player manager or a player leader, or they just go straight into a leadership position. They've got to learn what to do now. They're not just a player anymore who are responsible for themselves and their own production. They're responsible for other people. And they've got to know what that new role entails. And this is the program you need for that. How to do the performance management, how to coach people, how to communicate with people as a leader, clarify your role, understand what you've got to achieve here. Very good one-day program. That's the 27th of January. A little more in-depth, leadership training for managers, well, a little bit more in-depth, much more in-depth. It's a 7-week program, starts on May 19. This is really everything in a box for leadership. It's so thorough, it's so detailed, it's so comprehensive. In Japan, many, actually I'd say almost 99% of Japanese leaders became leaders because they reached a certain age and stage and they said, okay, now you've got this position. Didn't give them any training, didn't explain about leadership, never really helped them. They're working it out as they go along, they're making it up as they go along, they're doing trial and error, mainly error. And so this is the program you need for this group of people who have never really properly been trained. Leadership Training for Managers, 7-week program, starts May 19. It'll fill in all the gaps. It'll fix up all the errors. It'll really get them on the right direction. They'll really love this program. Be like, oh my God, why didn't I have this when I became, a leader with a little bit more experience? They'll really thank you for putting them on that program. Now, our website is just chock full of useful resources. Go there, enjapan.dalecarnegie.com. You can email me at greg.story@dalecarnegie.com. If you like learning by watching, we have nearly 900 videos over there at Japan Dale Carnegie TV on YouTube. We're releasing 2 TV shows every week on YouTube. The Cutting Edge Japan Business Show, that's the premier business show in Japan. That comes out every Monday, Tokyo time, and Fridays we have the Japan Business Mastery Show. Also, get my new book, Japan Sales Mastery, and that's the Bible on selling in Japan, and my new book, Japan Business Mastery. They're both available on Amazon. They're both bestsellers on Amazon, so check those out. And so, talking about the trust before, and you're talking about having that ability to show some vulnerability to certain key members and build that trust. How does that filter down to the other people on the bottom of the organization? Because often when we're sitting up the top, what we imagine is happening is often not happening because the middle management are not passing it on, not passing on the communication or driving the culture change we want. How do you get around that sort of problem?
It's another difficult question. What I'm trying to do is 3 things. One is I'm personally trying that with leadership team so that there are some leaders who change their behaviors that mirrors what I'm trying to do. So on that silo, there's certain cascading down. The other thing that I'm trying to do is to have more frequent direct communication with everybody, not one-on-one, but all staff meeting, all staff outing, stuff like that, where I can actually directly talk to them. And the final thing is to put when we evaluate people, we try to pick that up. That if the person is trying to live the culture or the values or what behaviors so that we can talk about that in the evaluation.
Is that just a Japan thing for interbrand, or is that sort of standard interbrand practice around the world?
I don't think it's standard practice, but one big thing about what we are trying to do around the world is we're trying to put more and more emphasis on the values and behaviors and engagement. So every office has different approach, and that is left to the leader of each office because, as we said, the context is always different. So every leader has different approach, but there's big shift in focus on the global level that we need to engage people better.
Talking about engagement, often for multinational companies, they have many offices around the world. They run these global engagement surveys once a year, once every 2 years. And, when I've been in these meetings where they've shown the results, global results, for some interesting reason, you may have some insight into this for your time in Argentina. Normally, South America is off the chart in terms of engagement scores, and APAC is usually the lowest, and then Japan's usually the lowest in APAC. It's very, very consistent. How about in the case of Interbrand? Do you have such things?
Yeah, we do. So we have annual engagement surveying. And the score actually doesn't have that typical pattern. So Japan isn't the worst performing office in that sense, but it's not the best performing office. I think that what's happening is, I'm not sure if that's the case, but I think the professional firm might have different what's the word? Style, not style. I guess the professional firm may have different culture when it comes to how they express themselves in the survey. Especially creative people, I think they do not really conform to the norm in a way, and they want to express more. So maybe that plays a role in that too.
And do you get pressure from headquarters? Japan's numbers look a bit low. Masa, you better get those engagement numbers up there. Do you get that type of pressure?
Yeah, we had that meeting about a month ago.
Oh. And people often say to me that Japanese conservatism is such that if you gave them a 5-point scale, they'll look for 3. And so, it's very hard to get off 3, And they think 3 is pretty good. From their point of view, you're doing a great job, I give you a 3. Whereas maybe in Argentina, you do an average job, you're getting a 7 or something out of 5, So is it possible to explain that sort of Japan bias in doing those sort of scale scoring to headquarters? Well, they don't accept it.
I would love to do that, but they do not accept that. So I haven't tried it yet, but I think one thing what we need to do when it comes to employee engagement survey is to explain what scores needs to what we need to do is to explain what score means. I think like you said, there's unspoken understanding of what that things need to be around 3 or in the middle. I think we need to explain that it doesn't need to be that way, so that people feel more empowered to rank as they really want to.
Often I think in Japan's case, people are loyal, but they're conservative in the scoring. And so when I ask people, well, yes, they're scoring like this, but do you think they're not engaged? And usually the answer is they don't talk about engagement in that sense. They talk about loyalty. That, no, I think they're very loyal. But being loyal and being engaged, I think there's an overlap there, but maybe it's also engagement is a little bit different. This comes around to accountability you talked before, and also innovation, wanting to drive the company's progress, be part of that. How about that case for Interbrand in Japan? Do you get a sense that people really want to innovate inside the company, or innovation is something that only the creatives do innovation, everyone else does something else? I mean, how do you get innovation going in the company?
So to that point, I started the more I talk to everybody, the more I feel everybody wants to do something new. Everybody wants to innovate. Everybody wants to go out of their boundaries. Having said that, not everybody actually do that. I think the key is to give them hint or direction what they could do. So when I tell them you could take any risk and you could innovate anything, they get lost.
Why is that?
I think it's a good question. My hypothesis is I guess a few reasons. One, they know they need to innovate, so they say that. But even when they authentically want to innovate, many of them don't know what that means in their job in a real tangible way. Also, many of them are used to be given direction in their work. So I think that goes the same for innovation. So when there's a direction, hey, this is the direction that we want to go, can you come up with the way of how we make it better or how we can do it better? It's easier for them to be innovative, I guess.
And now, how do you deal with this situation where you give them the freedom to innovate, they innovate, but from your point of view, this is not good work or not good enough work, or this innovation is not sufficiently interesting to put any money or people resource behind it to drive it, but they've actually tried but not done a great job? How do you deal with that situation?
Right. So, well, I guess to that question is we do need to kill that. We don't have infinite resource. So I need to make decision to kill one thing or the other. But the key is how you kill it. We don't want to kill it just because it wasn't good. I think we do talk about it. We identify if this is where we should put more resource or not, and at least reach some level of consensus so that we can stop it. If the person sticks to it, I guess what I did is, if that is your passion, then you can go for it, but you cannot really leverage company resource. But if you make efficient use of time, find the time to do it within your responsibility, you can go for it.
Type of what they call skunk works in America, right? Sort of not a side hustle, it's within the company, but it's you're working on something to the side there to keep them going. And so what about, for example, you've got a creative side, you've got an analytical side, I guess. How do you get creativity? I mean, creatives probably already know how to be creative. They're selected themselves to be creative, I suppose. Is it possible to take that capability and work that into the other parts of the team to sort of cross-pollinate some of that creativity so that the people in other jobs can also become more creative, or creatives are sort of already sort of set and you're over here, it doesn't cross-pollinate much?
I think it does. I think it does. And we are trying hard to make it happen more and more. But I don't think there's a system that make it happen. What I have seen is the more interaction that exists, out of the interaction, there's more creativity. So I don't know if that makes people in strategy team more creative, but as a work, things get a lot more creative. So, and in the end, what matters is what comes up. So it is not the most efficient way of use of resource, but even when it is, say, strategy work, when creative people get involved, the quality of output tends to be a bit more creative, at least. So as an organization, I don't know if that really helping the strategists to become more and more creative as a person. But as a team, it's easy to see the impact of higher creativity in the output, even from strategy work.
I've seen instances where the leader has tried to create a more innovative environment. And so people start innovating with ideas. But the leader can't deal with the ideas because they're inflexible. You know, they're rigid, maybe a little bit old, a little bit more old school, and they feel a bit challenged by some of these new ideas because it's a bit counter to what they're thinking. Have you had these sorts of experiences where you suddenly got some innovation, you go, oh, I don't like that innovation. It's not what I want to do. Do you have that sort of problem?
Well, I guess I do. I never really thought about that. And I guess the fact that I never really thought about it that way may already be a problem, because I'm sure there must be idea that has been brought to me that I didn't approve. I thought it wasn't good enough or worth enough for investment, but I never thought that's because it's against my comfort or because it's out of my comfort zone. So I guess it must have happened, but I don't know. At least on my mind, I try not to do that. I try to be open, and it's not. I think my career has helped me to be open and to be to accept something new. So I'm consciously not try to do that. So, but I guess that, yeah, it's kind of difficult.
Are there any things about leadership in Japan that I should have asked you that I haven't asked you?
I think the key is really, I think one thing that I came to appreciate more and more as a leader in the past couple of years is to believe in or to have confidence in your intuition. I don't know if it's a Japanese thing or not. So it may not be relevant in the Japanese context. But as a leader, when intuition says otherwise, or when I make decision while intuition says otherwise, I always find it not the right decision that I made.
So you if you go against your gut feel for something, you find it doesn't work out as well. So you tend to follow that as a guide.
I tend to trust my intuition more. So when my intuition says otherwise, I try not to jump into the conclusion. Mm-hmm. And I think that also be open about that has helped me to send a message that I am who I am.
And when you say be open about that, like your intuition is giving you some view on a decision, and you're open about it, how are you open about it?
So before, when I make decision, I always try to bring logic to the conclusion. So I have discussion, they present, we discuss, and I give conclusion based on the logic. But these days, I started to say, I understand, and logically, I feel it's right, but something feels wrong. So let's have more discussion about it. That kind of discussion. So it's not trying to be a leader who always have the answer, but to be a leader who can communicate that openly. I may not have the answer, but I feel not right. So let's have a conversation around it.
How's the reaction to that?
They tend to have, I think in the first, when I started doing that, people showed a bit of surprise. But as I do that more, people started to feel that it's part of the business as usual, and they're open to have conversation.
How far into the 5 years you've been running the business did you start to talk about, I don't feel that's right? When did you start making that change?
Last year.
Oh, okay, so it's already 4 years into it, so you feel, yeah. And what other things are you thinking there that I should have asked you about leadership that I didn't?
I think to lead organization in Japan, I think we cannot underestimate the power of empowerment. So we talked about that at the beginning, but when I want to make any changes, the key has been for me to empower my subordinate and talk with them so that the direction of the change is in line with the direction of the change I want to make. Because without subordinate owning the change, no change sticks. Especially in Gaishike, where top management comes and goes, they learn to be patient for a few years until the storm passes, because they know they can get back to where they were, unless it's a change that they make. So all the changes that I asked my subordinate to make didn't stick. But all the changes that I discussed with my subordinate and subordinate initiated has stayed. So I think we, especially in Gaishike, where people in the company sees the top management comes and go every several years, and if you want the change to really stick in the organization, not when you are there, you really need to give that happen from not you.
And if you give, say, a couple of pieces of advice to foreign leaders, okay, you're going to be sent to Japan, run our operation there, and they don't know much about Japan, what would be some advice you'd give them that they should think about in trying to be a leader in Japan?
One is assume that you don't know why things is happening the way it's happened. Two, try to connect personally. The third one was to keep showing the respect to Japan. That was the third one. So I think the combination of that three, so assume that you don't know why things is happening, you continue to show the respect to Japan, and always try to establish personal relationship, I think that will help you to find different sorts of different resources within the company. Of course, if a person spoke no English, it's difficult. And it's always difficult to learn Japanese in short time. But there are enough people who speak some English. And the key is how you get connected. So if you do the opposite of what I said, if you assume you know why things is happening, and you act as if Japan doesn't matter, and you sit the boss because you're important, nobody opens up because you don't really matter to them. But if you do three, then naturally you become more curious, and people sees you as more friend. And because you do try to talk, it's easier things come up. And I think that's the key.
Well, this has been a fascinating discussion from Masa here on the inner workings of Japanese companies and working with teams, and I think some great insights there. So I'd like to thank you very much for sharing those with us today. This has been very, very interesting, and I'm really impressed about APAC tango champion as part of your background. That's terrific. And I'm going to ask quickly, how was it in Argentina when you were doing tango there compared to what you're doing before? Was that a real eye-opener for you?
Yes, because the culture is very different, right? So I did tango, I learned Spanish, and also I did MBA in Argentina. So I saw different part of Argentina, right? The serious people in MBA, foreigners trying to learn Spanish, and people learning tango. It's completely different set of people. So even within that, I saw that how culture could be diverse, even within Buenos Aires. And that really opened a very different perspective, because say, when I lived in the States, it's different, but it's still within what I understood. But how people work in Argentina was out of what I could imagine. So it really deepened my, tolerance to get in touch and absorb the new thing. It was very different. It was very interesting.
Well, we take inspiration from different places as leaders, and getting that insight and diversity and different cultures, different perspectives is something that certainly for Japan is going to be very important. Please join us again for the next episode of Japan's Top Business Leaders. Joining the Leadership Japan series. If you found the program useful, then tell your family, friends and colleagues. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe and share this podcast. You can contact me at greg.story@dalecarnegie.com. Lots of great stuff on our website, injapan.dalecarnegie.com. Until the next episode, take what you thought valuable, put it into action, because idea application is what makes winners winners. So be one of them.